What would you do if you had one single day in charge of World of Tanks development? Well, I'm sure some of you guys are already typing your replies of remove the BZ-176 and delete the whole entire class of artillery. I know that there are some of you guys thinking of the larger issues in World of Tanks, like the matchmaker or the newer player experience. The issue with addressing these type of problems in one day, though, is that they're highly complex, and they deserve a solution that is fitting for the size of the problem, and that would take longer than just one day in development. But this doesn't mean that we can't tackle some parts of these larger issues with some smaller, yet highly effective changes. And that is why today I have gathered 40 different quality of life ideas that could instantly improve the health of World of Tanks and could all be implemented within one single day. So as we dive into these different ideas, I want you guys to be thinking of two primary things. What changes did you enjoy from this list the most? And secondly, what other quality of life changes would you like to see made that weren't included in this list? This video will be part one, and there's a good chance that if you comment, your feedback will be in the second follow-up video. And with this all said, let's dive right in. The first quality of life issue we're going to tackle is actually one of the larger ones, and it's because it's actually quite easy to fix. This is RNG. Simply put, the RNG in our game is too punishing. So what would I do in order to fix this? I have two solutions for RNG. The first is regarding the penetration rolls that we currently have. Right now, it is at a plus or minus 25%. That means if you get past the accuracy RNG and your shell actually hits the target, there's a chance that it might low roll and you may not penetrate. This needs to be lowered. As in, we need to change it from plus or minus 25% down to plus or minus 15%. The next change I would make is towards the accuracy. If you've been playing the game long enough, you'll know that in update 9.6, the accuracy was changed so that hitting targets on the move wasn't as common. And regardless of whether you think that's a good change or not, one of the things that we can universally agree on is that it's infuriating to have a very accurate tank miss shots just because of RNG, and that's the result of this distribution change that they made in update 9.6. So is there a middle ground solution so that tanks aren't just hitting stuff on the move, and so that accurate tanks can actually hit their shots? Well, of course there is, and it involves just fixing the math in our game. Instead of having about 68% of our shots go where they're supposed to go in a normal distribution, we squish that distribution and create a distribution where about 80% of our shots are actually on our targets. Additionally, if they are worried about players hitting too many targets on the move, they can just make the shot dispersion dependent on the percentage of the vehicle's top speed, not just based on the maximum reticle blue. This would ensure that players aren't just hitting random shots left and right in their KV2s while going maximum speed. The next fix I would make to RNG, it doesn't actually relate to RNG, but rather the reticle. Simply put, I would add the better reticle size mod as a toggle on or off feature in the game. Just in the same way we could use a server reticle, I would love for people to be able to use the better reticle size mod in game so that people have a better idea of where their shots could truly land and they feel as if there's less RNG in the game. It's a very positive change, and I 100% recommend that you guys actually use this mod because it actually might help improve your gameplay. One of the quality of life changes that absolutely needs to be made to the game concerns the after death camera. Now, while we can toggle on this after death camera, there is still a short pause of time when you're not able to type or move around your camera. And this is really important for being able to relay information. If I can't type to my teammates not to go into a certain crossfire, my teammates will die. And this is really useful information to relay. So therefore, removing this little pause or whatever it's supposed to be absolutely needs to be made towards the game so that players can actually relay this information. And speaking of annoying camera grievances, when I'm trying to use the tactical camera by scrolling out and I'm getting stuck on a building, it is very frustrating. This should be fixed, and immediately so, because it is very annoying to not know whether an enemy is looking at me or I can actually safely poke, and it is very important information in those micro engagements. Needs to be fixed. Enough said. Another frustration I have is when I actually get back from the garage and I realize I didn't actually activate any of my boosters. And I believe something like a reminder, at least in the very first game when you get into the battle, it should send the player a reminder if they want to activate a booster for that session. I think it would be really useful, and it's a good way for Wargaming to help people burn their boosters. Another feature that I would absolutely add is a play next button. This would be best for solo players who are trying to grind credits, because if you're at the end of the battle and you have to go back to the garage, you're essentially wasting a little bit of time and your boosters by going back there. If there was a play next button, you could just go on to the next battle and continue on in your favorite credit grinding tank. Now, before we move on to some changes that would absolutely improve the matchmaker, I want to ask that if you are enjoying this video that you leave a like and consider subscribing, because it helps me push out this video to a larger audience. And if you want to talk about these topics more in depth or share some of your own ideas, consider joining my Discord, and I would love to have you guys on so we can brainstorm some more. The next two ideas are going to focus on making the matchmaking slightly better. Even though we may not be able to fully tackle the issue in one single day, the first idea that would absolutely help the matchmaker is by giving mirror matchmaking to certain overpowered tanks. Tanks like the Brask, the ELC EV90, and the BZ-176, along with tanks like the Panzer V-4 and the Left, all need mirror matchmaking. Currently, if one team has one of these tanks and the other team doesn't, it's a clear power difference that creates imbalances in the game as it progresses. What needs to happen is a guaranteed mirror opponent, so at the very least we have fair matches and possibly a more fair outcome. Additionally, I also think we need to limit the amount of these tanks that can be in one single platoon to at least only 2. There's no reason why we need to have 3 BZ-176s in one platoon or 3 Brask in one platoon. 2 is already powerful enough, and 3 is impossible for the matchmaker to be able to balance. There's no way it's going to come up with another 3 BZs on the other team. And I understand that players may not like this, but it is for the overall health of the game, and so that we can combat turbo matches, which are in part created by these types of platoons. My next idea is slightly tangential to matchmaking, but would absolutely help it. Currently, players don't want to be playing Assault and Encounter modes simply because the quality of life in those battles is extremely low. Now, I'm one of the players who actually enjoys those modes, but there are certain maps where teams just have no clue what to do. Those are the types of maps I wish I could actually block out, and this is something I wish we had control over as the players, is the ability to block as many of these maps as I want so that I can keep playing the ones that I actually do like. This way, the player base would be less fragmented between players who want to be playing these modes and that don't. Currently, because of this fragmentation, it actually makes the matchmaker work harder in order to achieve what we have right now. Freeing up these players to be able to be in these different battles might have that positive benefit of decreasing queue times and improving the quality of the matches that the matchmaker creates. And the last thing I want to add to this section is in regards to maps. It may not relate to matchmaking, but since I don't have a map section, I'm going to leave it right here. We need to not have Ensk and Mines available for tier 8 and up. The maps themselves are too small and they are too congested, and the quality of gameplay on these maps is not good enough or conducive to upper tier gameplay. And until they expand these maps like we've seen teased for Ensk, I don't believe these maps should be in the rotation for upper tiers. But let me know what you guys think of this idea in the comment section. The next two ideas would deal with the battle results screen. I personally would like it if our marks calculation was shown right on the results screen as a toggle on or off feature. This way we don't have to go into the statistics page and find out whether we dropped our mark or we increased it. Additionally, I would also love for the old defeat and victory music to be back. That way, the players who have been playing for a while can enjoy a little bit of nostalgia. Another fun addition for World of Tanks to have would be the additional placements for decals. Currently, I don't believe there are enough places to place our 5 bajillion decals that we've been given, and giving us more options to actually place this would just be an overall positive thing to do. Another minor change I would make for the garage is just a read-all for notifications. There is no way that I'm going to go through all the different decals and styles in this game, because there are just too many of them. So allow us to read all of these notifications, make this for decals, make it for friend requests, make it for everything that involves notifications, please and thank you. Another positive change that I would do is have 2 types of paint. You can have the paint that doesn't give camouflage, and then you could also have a paint that would give camouflage. This way players don't have to choose between customization and also camo that they can't customize. Also, the ability to search for decals and search for different styles would also be super useful, as it's really frustrating to find that one style and where it's placed. And in a similar vein, sometimes you want to look at your equipment and where it's placed, and it only gives you a limited list. Being able to expand this list would be really useful because I know what I could take equipment off of. The next thing I would add is custom tank filters. Currently you can filter by tank type, tier, and whether or not it's a premium tank, but it would also be really nice to be able to filter by my favorite lower tiers, or possibly my favorite credit grinders. Having these filters would mean I would be able to access different things in a much faster fashion. Continuing with ideas that would save time, I also believe that an auto return crew feature that is currently a modification in Aslan's mod pack would be a great addition to the game. I can't tell you how many times I've wanted to play a tank and then see that the crew isn't quite ready and you have to go in and manually transfer the crew. This modification has saved me so much time, and it should be a built-in feature into the game. And speaking of things that should be built-in features into the game, players should have the ability to see the hidden parameters. These are things like the hidden dispersion factors and also ground resistances. This way we can better compare tanks and find out what their playstyle would be like in the garage and not have to rely on third-party websites. The next group of ideas are aimed at making the player experience economically better and better for newer players in particular. So let's get into it. The first change that I would implement is lowering the cost of the camouflage that you can buy for 75,000 credits. At first, when you are playing the game, 75,000 credits is actually quite a lot. Lowering this, especially for a lot of the lower tier tanks, the light tanks, and the medium tanks that need it, is a good thing because it helps the teams that are having the new players so that they don't die right away, and it also just helps the newer players' experience be better because camouflage is essential in our game. Not only would this help their economy, it would also help their performance. And in a similar vein, I would also reduce the repair cost for everything tier 7 and below. I believe that a reduction from anywhere from 10 to 20% in repair cost would be an especially good thing for non-premium vehicles, so that players can actually progress and have marginally less costs as they do that. After tier 8, sure, things will get more expensive, but before that, let's make the newer player experience just a little bit better. It's also worth noting that a change like this may encourage some players to stay down at lower tiers so that they can learn the game, and as a byproduct, this actually improves matchmaking. Tier 7 is one of those buffer tiers, so if we're incentivizing more players to be at tier 7, then we create more opportunities for the matchmaker to create +1, -1 matchmaking, which is much more preferable than the +2, -2 matchmaking that we have a lot today. And something that would benefit every single player, regardless of whether they are new or they've been playing for a while, is adding an armor inspector so that players can actually learn the armor models of the different tanks that they're facing up against or that they're playing with. Having a learning feature like this will help players learn the game more effectively, and having it be more available inside the game instead of having to go to a third-party website is absolutely essential for players progressing and having more fun in this game. In a similar vein, one of the challenges that all players face is positioning on maps. Now, map positioning is arguably one of the most, if not the most important thing in World of Tanks when it comes to winning and also progressing in this game. I believe a learning feature that shows us the common positions where different tank types usually play is a great way for some players to actually learn where they're supposed to be positioning, especially for the player base which seems to think that all triangles should be sniping. It should break it down by assault tank destroyers and also sniper tank destroyers, so that players at least have no excuse left for not knowing where their tanks are supposed to be going. And it offers newer players an opportunity to understand where they can go to best effectively use their tank. The next idea is going to make some of you guys very happy. The training room that Wargaming uses in all their promotional videos for new lines needs to be available to all of us. It is something they have in the files, they can add it in instantly, and we could be having fun right now if they just added it to the game. Additionally, we should be able to go into training rooms alone. There should be no reason why a new player has to go and find a friend in order to learn the maps, or anybody who just wants to explore the maps should have to have another person online. Sometimes we just don't feel like getting another person in. Enough said. In the next section, I'm going to talk specifically about light tanks. This is a class that I've talked about at length, and I'm going to repeat some of the ideas that I've had before, but some of them will be very new and very influential towards increasing the quality of life in World of Tanks. The option for medium tanks to mount CVS needs to be removed. I've gone over why this is in some of my other videos, but I've also come up with a solution for CVS that would help a lot of the lower tiered light tanks when they are facing a lot of the upper tiered light tanks, because even with the different solutions, like taking CVS away from mediums, they're still at a disadvantage against tier 8 light tanks. So how do we fix this gap? Well, the solution is to just bake CVS into every single light tank so they get it by default, and have it turned off for tier 7 and tier 6 light tanks if they're not facing tier 8. Not only would this close the gap between lower tier lights and higher tier lights, for all light tanks it would actually free up an equipment slot so that they can actually have different dynamic builds like all the other classes. Currently, if you're playing light tanks, you probably use the same build in about 95% of the battles, and you might switch it up for something like Ensk, but that's really the only case in which you do this. Otherwise, most of the time you're going to be running CVS, Exhaust, and Optics on pretty much all the other maps. The goal is to promote different types of dynamic play, and something like this would allow light tanks to finally be able to do that. And I think a lot of the light tank players and anybody who's trying to get into light tanks would much more enjoy this than what we have now, where it's basically just one build. The next thing I wanted to address as far as light tanks go concerns EBRs. There is zero reason why when I'm hitting an EBR wheel and then my team is able to hit him because he's going slower, that I should not get the assistance. I should absolutely be getting some amount of assistance. Maybe it's not full, like I would be for tracking another vehicle, but some amount would be better than what we have now, which is nothing. In a similar vein, if I am hitting a tank, and I'm hitting their ammo rack, or I'm hitting their engine, and it's completely stopped the tank, I need to be getting assistance for that too, because the only reason why the next player was actually able to ammo rack them was because I hit it first. The only reason why the person was able to hit the VKK is because I killed its engine. So absolutely, we should be getting assistance for that. And I know it's a little bit unrelated to light tanks, but it's in the same vein. But the one thing that affects every single class's gameplay is the map design. As it currently stands, there's very few maps where light tanks really have true opportunities to do good spotting. And the unique inverse problem is that when they are not present on these certain maps, those type of maps can become very campy really quickly, and the game doesn't progress, and it often will end in something like a draw. I think we can all agree that these types of games feel like a waste of time. So how do we solve the problem of super campy matches caused by a lack of light tanks, while also giving light tanks more of an opportunity to actually have matches that are good for spotting? Well, the solution is just to guarantee a light tank on certain maps. Maps like Melanovka or Prokhorovka should absolutely have a light tank present. There is no reason why at least one light tank on each team should not be present in these type of matches. The next idea that needs to be implemented for the quality of life of light tank players is a soft cap on the number that can be in each battle. I believe that the soft cap should be 2, and in cases where the matchmaker cannot deal with it, it should be 3. The reason why is because light tanks fulfill a very specific niche in each battle, and when you have 3 of them trying to compete for that niche, it just doesn't work, and it's detrimental for the team, and it's detrimental for the players that are playing those light tanks. Lastly, I want to talk about the light tanks that are less of light tanks and more like faux mediums that are worse than actual medium tanks. If you don't know what I'm talking about, these are light tanks like the Sheridan and the Tessak. They don't do the normal light tank duties all too well because they suck at spotting, but they are excellent damage dealers. The problem is that because they have such low HP, they're going to get punished harder for exposing themselves, even though part of their primary role is to do damage. In order to help these tanks be less punished for doing their job, I believe having them be spotted for a base level of 9 seconds instead of the normal 10 seconds would be a way to marginally help their playstyle. And since we're talking about tanks which specifically need extra help, we can't go without mentioning the Type 71 line. Now, in my opinion, and the opinion of a lot of other people, this line needs a lot more help than what I am about to propose, but at the very least, changing the aiming mechanic so that it's about 50% faster will help these tanks at least have a far more useful mechanic than they do currently. In the same way, I also believe the British mediums suffer from similar design flaws. The fact that they cannot turn effectively makes them much worse mediums than a lot of other tracked options, given the fact that they aren't really all that much faster. If you're not able to turn effectively, then you lose your mobility advantage that many of the other medium tanks have in your class. I believe by increasing their turn radius just slightly to something almost on par with what the RU server has would be an effective solution to make them at least a little bit more playable. Now, it wouldn't be a quality of life video if I did not mention artillery. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on artillery because I've talked about it before. However, I'm going to reiterate some of the changes that I would make in order to make players' lives a lot easier with artillery in it. The first and most important change I'm going to say here is limiting the amount of artillery that can be in a battle. Currently, we have a soft cap of 2 artillery per team, and you can have 3 in rare cases, but I still think 2 is one too many, as they can basically fire interchangeably and lock down a whole entire flank if they're focusing it. Limiting the amount of artillery to 1 per game would drastically help this problem. And while a change like this won't get rid of all the artillery players, we also know that a lot of the people who play artillery aren't playing it because they like it, but because they are trying to complete missions, whether those be personal daily missions or whether those be campaign missions. This is where we can actually have some positive changes. I believe the critical hit missions for 5 or 7 critical hits in a battle should be abolished. These things are specifically made so people hop in artillery and start to play it in order to complete it. We can replace these or just totally remove them, but removing this incentive for people to play artillery should absolutely be a change that is made so that we don't have an excessive amount of artillery players in a queue at one time. Concerning the campaign missions, we just need to make the missions for assistance slightly easier. Right now, it's very hard to do it because of the large medkit cooldown buff and because of the changes to practicality, so I think the mission difficulty should be reflective of the times that we are in for artillery. The easier the missions, the more players actually complete it, and the less players that are playing artillery, which is exactly what the majority of players would want. Now, while this may have been the last idea on this list, I do plan on making a part 2 follow-up in collaboration with another YouTuber who has a very unique perspective. So be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on part 2, and in the comment section, let me know any additional ideas that you have, regardless of how long you'd think they would take to implement. As always, I am looking forward to hearing your guys' feedback, and I hope you guys all have a good day. I will see you guys soon in the next one. Peace.